Well, hello, I'm Josh and I'm back once again with another great film to tell you about. And as you know, it is October, and so that means I'm going to have three spooky movies to tell you about this month. And so to kick us off, I thought I'd start with a real classic. I'm going to be talking about Henri-Georges Cluzot's 1955 thriller, Diabolique. Diabolique takes place in a boarding school and follows two teachers, one an abused wife and the other her husband's mistress, as they carefully plot and murder the cruel husband, who also happens to be the headmaster at their school. They plant the body face down in the pool, but the next day they are horrified to discover that the body has disappeared. Did somebody take it? Could someone have seen them that night? Or could there be something more supernatural afoot? Soon, the two women's psyches begin to unravel as more and more of these odd occurrences start cropping up around the school. So as I said, Diabolique was directed by Henri-Georges Cluzot, a very accomplished French writer and director of thrillers, often compared with the likes of Alfred Hitchcock. And in fact, this film played a pretty important role in Hitchcock's career as well. You see, Hitchcock also wanted to direct this film after reading the book it was based on, She Who Was No More, only to be beaten to the punch by Clouzot. And this film became a huge hit amongst audiences and critics alike, and one of the most successful films of the year. And seeing this, Hitchcock bought the rights to the authors Pierre Boileau and Thomas R. Sajak's follow-up novel, which turned out to be Vertigo, a film that's very acclaimed today, but at the time it was actually seen as a huge failure. So seeing that his big-budget VistaVision color film was essentially beaten at its own game by a cheap foreign film shot in the old 4:3 format, he was inspired by this competition to return to his roots with his very own low-budget horror film by the name of Psycho. In fact, he even borrowed Clouzot's message campaign, asking theatergoers to not spoil the film's ending. So needless to say, this film is a must-watch for anyone who loves a good thriller. And it still plays incredibly well today, even amongst younger audiences. You see, as I mentioned, by this time, Clouzot was pretty much known as the king of thrillers in France, with his films like the classic Les Corbeaux and most famously The Wages of Fear, which he made the year before. That one, a film about truckers hauling nitroglycerin through the jungle, is often considered to be one of the most suspenseful films of all time. It was even remade by the late William Friedkin in the 1970s as the underrated classic Sorcerer. But as suspenseful as The Wages of Fear was, I just love how Clouzot followed up his hit in such a unique way. I mean, going in, you think you know where it's going. Classic James M. Cain stories like Double Indemnity and The Postman Always Rings Twice had already popularized these kinds of crime stories 10 years earlier. But the story of Diabolique soon takes a shift for the seemingly supernatural after the dead body disappears, and while I don't want to give too much away in case you haven't seen this film, I'll just say that it always keeps you guessing what will happen next. And much like how many people say that you can learn all you need to know about film form from Hitchcock, I think the same could very easily be said about Clouzot. Even with a minimal music score, he is still able to draw an audience in and keep them on the edge of their seats, first playing with how the murder will go down, and then toying with the characters as they try to cover it up. And furthermore, this film is such an incredible study on perspective, as it is almost just as much about what the audience sees as what they don't see, making future rewatches that much more rewarding. And one of the ways Clouzot gets us so invested in the film has to do with how he really puts you in the perspective of the main character, Christina de la Salle. At first, she is still pretty hesitant to kill her husband, but Clouzot doesn't hold back in making the headmaster a despicable character, eventually pushing her over the edge. And even after they murder him, they are constantly having to narrowly avoid being caught. And Clouzot's use of sound and silence to add to the tension is perfect and quite evocative of some of the old Val Lewton films of the 1940s, where shaping of the horror in the imagination of the audience was emphasized through shadowy visuals and unsettling sound design, all making up for the lack of budget. And the films ended up being all the more frightening because of it. Clouzot uses many of the same principles here, particularly things like the sounds of water faucets and footsteps in the dark, along with subtle visual cues like a sole bedroom light coming on in the middle of the night, with a shadow passing by or a door creaking open in the dark. They're not necessarily even shot that stylishly or with flashy cool camera angles like Hitchcock would do, but we are put on the edge of our seats nonetheless. Though Clouzot could certainly make stylish visuals when he wanted to. You only need to take a look at some of the footage from his unfinished film Inferno to see that he was in no way against being experimental. But I think he saw that the scary elements of this film would be much more striking if he shot the rest of the film in a dry, straightforward, almost documentary way at times, with long takes showing every laborious moment of the characters when planning, executing, and covering up the murder. This way, when the strange and supernatural elements start popping up later on in the film, they just feel more real as it ends up putting you in the character's headspace rather than you just feel like you're watching a horror movie for the scares. A technique William Friedkin famously used when making his own hit horror film, The Exorcist. The way Clouzot follows the morgue workers as they bring the gurney down the hall and up the elevator is drawn out in one long take as the viewer is on the edge of their seat, trying to anticipate whether or not it could be Christina's husband. And the slow, methodical nature of this scene feels very similar to all the medical tests given to Regan in The Exorcist. The slower pace emphasizes the reality of the scene and ends up feeling much more tense because of it. The film did in fact spawn a Hollywood remake made back in 1996 with the likes of Sharon Stone, Isabelle Adjani, Chaz Palminteri, and Kathy Bates, along with a young Donald Logue and even J.J. Abrams. Anyway, the film is a pretty decent modern adaptation for the most part, though clearly missing Clouzot's mastery, as it is instead much more interested in slick camera moves than anything really subtle. But overall, a pretty solid remake, and much better than I was expecting. Until the end, that is, where it quickly turns into a dumb 90s horror film and drops all subtlety and coherence in exchange for an exciting action climax, with new twists coming every second. So in short, Diabolique is an incredible film and certainly ranks up there as one of my favorites. And though I get that subtitles may be hard for some viewers to get past initially, once the story gets going, you'll likely soon find yourself forgetting that they're even there. For me, I find they end up being kind of helpful for an easily distracted brain like many of us have nowadays, as they kind of force you to be fully focused on the film as you can't just get up and do other things or scroll on your phone. And though they may not be very well known here in the States, there are some great actors in this film. The main character, Christina, was played by Clouzot's actual wife, Véra Clouzot, who also had a small part in his previous film, The Wages of Fear. And she does a wonderful job showing her character slowly break down from the pressure, and really holds the film together as the one we see most of the story through, despite this only being her second film. Simone Signoret is also great as the much colder of the two teachers, Nicole Horner. She is probably the most famous actor in this film, also appearing in notable British films like Jack Clayton's Room at the Top, which she actually won Best Actress for, along with many more classic French films as well, such as Jean-Pierre Melville's Army of Shadows, which also starred Paul Meurisse. And Paul Meurisse was also quite famous, though did not have as much international notoriety, as he pretty much only worked in France. But he gives a really cruel and sinister performance as Michel, which, as I said earlier, is necessary as it allows the audience to understand why Christina feels that she has to kill him. And I must say, the images of him drowned in a bathtub are some of the most haunting and unforgettable in the whole film. So if you like to watch Diabolique, you have a few options. It's available to rent or buy from all the usual sites online, and it's currently streaming on the Criterion Channel and Max. But if you want to pick up the film physically, there is a very nice edition from Criterion that you can get on DVD or Blu-ray. But now for my comment question, and I'm wondering, what is your favorite thriller? I know that's a pretty big question as there are so many great ones out there, but go ahead and put some of your favorites in the comment section down below and start discussing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see some more of these. I'll be recommending some more great spooky movies all month, so be sure to stay tuned, and remember to keep watching movies. I'll see you again soon.